Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Totally Well Show. I'm your host, Joyce Strong. The Totally Well Show is the place where we get curious, ask questions, and explore everything to do with health, wellness, fitness, and all the things it takes to help you live the highest quality, most fulfilling life. And I'm here today with my guest, Rob Rains. Rob, welcome to the Totally Well Show.
Thank you so much, Joyce.
I'm so excited. I just met Rob, and just one of those things, the universe brings me somebody in my life who I just need to hear from, and I'm very grateful to be able to tap into your knowledge base and hear your story. But first of all, I want to tell our guests that you're another Groton resident.
Yes.
You have children, you're married.
Yes, I have a wonderful wife of almost 22 years.
Oh, wow.
22 years this summer, and 7 children.
7?
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. I have 5, so that's
you
wonderful.
know the drill.
Yeah, love children. I'm a hockey family, so I call my grandkids my second line. So we get a good second line going on now.
There you go. That's great.
Yeah.
We were still all first line. My eldest daughter, second child, was just recently married, so.
Oh, congrats.
I'm sure the second line will be coming in a few years.
Yeah, congratulations. That's
Thank you.
beautiful. And when I met you, you told me that that you work in the IT field.
I do.
What specifically, more specifically, what do you do?
Sure. I've been in IT for about 20 years.
Yeah.
I have a business partner, Ben Dolan, and he and I co-own Certissima Technologies, and basically just to help small businesses with their IT needs, small, medium businesses with their IT and related needs.
Oh, okay. All right. So small businesses.
Yeah.
So, but big changes in your life have
Yes.
happened, as we've talked earlier, and you are now a professional speaker and a transformation coach.
Yes.
But this started because of something in your own life.
It did. I up until fairly recently was fairly large. Well, really large. I was close to 400 pounds, and just felt a need to change. I mean, I want to be there for my children.
How much did you weigh?
I've weighed a little north of 370.
And how tall are you?
5'8".
Wow, that's a lot of weight for that frame.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
How did you get there?
It took a few decades,
Yeah.
but primarily just binge eating and using food as a dissociation method, not consciously, but just dissociating through food from, instead of feeling pain or other things. Instead of dealing with emotions that come up due to the normal stresses of life, I would eat instead.
So, is it okay if I ask you these questions?
Absolutely.
So, when you said dissociate, can you tell me what that meant to you?
Sure. One of the things, so this is something I'm using terms and concepts that I've discovered primarily since I began my journey because I needed to in order to change. But I learned that our brains are amazing gifts, and there's part of them that's designed to keep us alive, to protect us, and to perpetuate our species. And that part is responsible for things like our drive to eat, our heartbeat, our breathing and so forth, the things the unconscious activities. And that part of our brain also deeply protects who we are. It protects us not only from physical danger, but also from mental and emotional danger. And sometimes it does that by causing us to back away from or dissociate from things that cause us pain.
So separate from or cover?
Anything that causes us pain, it kind of backs us away or it causes that separation.
Okay.
The clinical term is dissociation.
Okay.
It causes us to dissociate.
Is that similar to how a person who might be using substances like drugs?
Absolutely, yeah. So any addiction is just a more severe form of dissociation.
Okay.
It's exactly the same thing.
Right.
Again, in what I've discovered, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not an expert in the field, but these things I've discovered from my personal journey.
Well, you are an expert because you've been through this, so that don't underestimate the value of your expertise here.
I appreciate it, and I'm an unwitting expert, I suppose. But yeah, I think every human being has dissociated in one form or another. If we have a boss yelling in our face, or a toxic coworker, or a frustration with a spouse or an angry teenager, we back away. You know, we've all had that experience where we withdraw and say, okay, I'm not going to talk to that person for a little bit, or I'm going to walk in the other room, I'm going to step away. Those are all ways to dissociate. They're not always healthy, but they're quick ways to disengage. Addiction is just a more severe form of that.
Could I ask you what was going on in your life that was painful?
Sure. Without going into great detail, there was some childhood trauma. I have and that caused some pain throughout life, more emotional pain to me, but I had a younger brother that I lost to suicide a couple years ago as a result of some of the trauma that he experienced.
Within your family of origin?
Within family, yes.
Yeah.
And primarily from my mother. She passed away in 2001. And my dad is still around, and he's fantastic. He's great and very understanding. But anyhow, there was a good amount of pain left over from that, and had a deep and lasting and unfortunately negative impact on the self-image and identity of some of my siblings, and particularly difficult impact on my younger brother. And so multiple siblings in our family have carried that around for some years.
I think it's common for things happen in families, and and that's why I asked. So thank you for sharing and being vulnerable there. I just like to help people understand that they're not the only ones who have gone through things and have the feelings we do. So
yeah, thank you.
I listened to one this morning from a fellow named who was on Steve Weatherford, and his name is London Papa Michael.
Okay.
I think that's how you pronounce it. And he had a separation from his father at around 10 and was very scarred from it. And he shares about the feelings he had. And so this idea of, children without fathers, without a parent, and what can happen. So anyway, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, to put it briefly in perspective, my mother suffered from what we posthumously believe to have been borderline personality disorder, and that tends to have a pretty negative and large impact on children. So again, putting it in perspective, I don't want to demonize her in any way. She had her own struggles that I now empathize with.
Yeah. Well, that's really kind of you, and it sounds like you've done a lot of work through that to get to this side. But that helps put in perspective for me where this started, because I think people need to know it's a protective mechanism.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, so then what?
So yeah, the
370 pounds.
Yeah, the 370 pounds. I give it's not a totally accurate number, but when I started my journey, I did want to get a before weight.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a scale that went that high.
Yeah.
So I waited till a few days into the journey, but it was about 370. My end goal is to be at about 170, which I think is a healthy weight for someone my height, and so it'll be a 200-pound loss when I'm finished. I'm about 165 pounds into that weight loss at the moment.
Wow, and you look fantastic.
Thank you so much.
And from what you've told me, it sounds like you feel fantastic.
Yes, much better.
Yeah. So how'd you do it?
Sure. The specific program I followed is called Bright Line Eating. Yeah. And narrowing it down, it's essentially eliminating sugar and flour. I don't believe this is everyone's case, but in my case, I have an addiction, a physical addiction to sugar and flour, that I use those comfort foods to dissociate so often that
they work.
And yes, they work really well, too well. Neural pathways are there.
And just to give the Bright Line Eating program, the word bright line, I think, comes from the law, from the legal term, which is a hard, fast line, so that to stop.
Yes, a hard, fast line is something that's very clear and easy to define. Yeah. That there's no ambiguity about which side of the line you've landed on. Yeah. And so I've cut sugar and flour out of my diet.
Completely, yeah. So there's not, should I have it today? It's
right.
I don't need that. Not my food.
Yes, it's just out, exactly. Yes. And that's been out of my life for about 11 months. Yeah. It was scary at first. I literally mourned ice cream and brownies.
Of course. Did you dream about them?
Yes. It's like you're in my head, Joyce. Yes, absolutely. But probably the most fun part was getting my family on board. There's one of the things I discovered was that having a tribe, having someone around you to help and support was really critical. And I joined some Facebook groups that were bright line eaters and others trying to be healthy. That really helped a lot. It was incredibly helpful. But I realized I've got this family. This is my tribe that I've chosen, and I can't walk away, if they're not following the same eating plan. So to get them on board, I made a deal with each of my children and said, when I lose an amount of weight equal to what you weigh, I will take you out on a daddy-kid date, and I'll put you on my back and carry you around the house. And so I've surpassed each of my children. I think this week I'm surpassing the heaviest of my kids, but I've surpassed each of my children and my wife.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
In weight. So it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Beautiful. I love how you engage them so creatively.
And they took the challenge. So my now 9-year-old daughter Tia, when she was 8, I took her trick or treating last Halloween. Yeah. People would offer candy to the kids, and they'd say, hey Dad, you're dressed up too. Do you want some candy? And she'd get between me and the candy and say, no, my dad's not going to have that. Thanks, he's good. Which was great. I got the kids on board, and they were protecting me, so it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, did you make other changes besides just the flour and the sugar?
I did. I had to. In order to make a change that large, I learned for myself that there's a change inside. There's an identity change to the self-image, that I had to see myself differently. Otherwise, it was going to be a miserable journey, as it had been for the last 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
There were so many times I'd tried and just really wanted that change, but didn't realize how to do it. And so changing that self-image took some time. I needed to change how I think, change the thoughts that I entertain consistently, needed to change the language and syntax that I use, and then change various behaviors and willingness and attitudes.
So can you give me an example of when you say change the language and syntax, like what you used to say versus what you say now?
Absolutely. So one of the changes comes right out of the Bright Line Eating book, but that is I no longer use the language, I can't eat that. I use the language, I don't eat that, or I choose not to eat that. Still very polite in declining food, and it's a very subtle shift, but the difference is, one is the language of a captive, I can't, and the other is the language of a captain. I choose not to. I'm steering this ship, and I'm in the driver's seat, not the passenger seat. It sends a subtle signal to my self-image, to my identity, that this is who I am now. I'm this new person. I'm not a fat guy struggling desperately to lose weight. I'm a healthy person, just doing what a healthy person does.
Yeah.
And so avoiding those foods becomes much easier. They still call, but not as loudly.
But and I think you know this too, rewriting, and just for our guests, you're actually rewiring your brain biochemically. You're changing, not just forcefully thinking something, but it's changing the structure of your brain.
Yes.
You are becoming a different person.
That is the goal, yes.
Yeah. So I love that. So other thing you said with the mindset shift, you were getting into another piece there.
Sure. Identity is something I've begun to learn about a lot in the past year. Excuse me, and it's quite powerful. I've learned that our identity, whatever we identify as, pulls us very strongly in that direction. And so in my case, if I identified and have for the past few decades as a fat person, as a heavy person, any attempts I made to change in a positive direction were thwarted. I was pulled back with an almost irresistible pull to fall back into old comfortable habits. And when I changed that identity to I'm a person who no longer eats sugar, I'm a person who no longer eats flour, I'm a person who eats correct portions and doesn't snack in between meals. Those are small shifts, but that new identity was something that took some effort, took some work to do. That pulls me in that direction now. It's almost it pulls me almost with the same irresistible pull that I want to keep that now. I don't want to break the streak. I don't want to lose who I'm becoming.
It's interesting the idea of practice. So when I look at my grandchildren, the little ones, so the youngest one is 2, and I see him practicing words and how to say things and put them together, and each time, sometimes he recognizes he's making a mistake, and you can see his frustration, but he practices it. And after a while, we get so good at learning, and that whole, maybe when we get to school, we're studying and we call it something else. Mm-hmm. So here you all of a sudden decide you want to make this huge change, which I see a lot of my clients do as well, mm-hmm. and myself. And we want it to happen overnight, sure, without practice. And so I love that you have you had a method, mm-hmm. and a structure and some consistency to the persistency and consistency to the practice, so that you get good at it. Right. So it wasn't overnight that you changed your identity.
It's not. There's a famous line, or a line from a movie called Forever Strong. It's the name of the movie, and it's about a rugby player that has some drug addiction problems, and it eventually turns his life around. But there's a point at which he's in a juvenile detention center, and the person who runs the center says to him, "Your problem is that ever since you've come here, you've been trying to go back home the same kid you were when you walked in the door." Mm-hmm. And that struck me. That became, for me, relevant to my journey. I couldn't get to the other end. I couldn't get to the 170 pounds the same guy that I was when I started. Yeah. It just wasn't going to happen. I needed to become a new person, and I love the person that I'm becoming. That's different. I wasn't in love with the old guy. I really wasn't. Yeah. An ideal father, an ideal husband. I really like who I am now.
So this has improved your life in so many ways. And now a whole new career is emerging as a public speaker, which I'm sure you'd be fantastic at.
I hope so.
Oh yeah, I can. You're very well spoken, and then to see you sitting down and having this kind of a conversation with clients, and helping them learn from the dummy tax you pay.
It's true. I paid the tax, and it's thrilling when I share principles with them that give them those aha moments, and they say, this is what I needed. This is exactly what I needed. It's wonderful. That's a great reward.
I'm curious about some of the structure. I know. So, Rob, your website is powerfulidentity.com.
Yes.
And they'll put that up on the lower third, so our guests will know how to reach you. When you and I were chatting, you talked about your 7 specific shifts. You had sort of a signature program that you use with your clients.
Yes.
Can you give me a little quick? We don't have too much time, but
sure.
Yeah, a quick summary of what that.
Yeah, I had a client in the beginning ask me, "How did you change your identity?" And I went and thought about it and wrote a lot about it and came up with 7 specific shifts that I made. I'll just list them out quickly now, but without much explanation. For purposes.
I'm going to jot them down when you do.
Sure. The first one I call powerful thoughts. Mm-hmm. The second one is powerful language.
Yeah.
That's the thing I mentioned to you about changing the language and syntax. A third one is powerful knowledge, being willing to study whatever it is that we're trying to change in and become an expert in. Mm-hmm. The fourth is powerful tribe, surrounding ourselves with support. The fifth one is powerful motivation. This is changing from being driven by fear to being driven by love or motivated by love. That's a big piece. The sixth one is powerful sacrifice. And that's a scary word, but it simply means changing our focus from whatever it is that we're giving up to whatever it is that we're getting. So it's still a focus on good things. It's just not pining after the things that we've decided we're going to bury or give up. In my case, sugar and flour. Mm-hmm. And then the seventh one is powerful focus. That idea comes from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, where he talks about focusing on who we're becoming instead of focusing on the end goal or the destination.
Mm-hmm. Focusing. So for that last one, creating a vision?
Sure. So it's changing my focus. So instead of focusing hard on the 170 pounds, which is my eventual goal, that's my destination, if I hang my hat and my happiness on the 170 pounds, then from 370 all the way down to 171 is going to be a miserable, arduous journey. But I'm focusing instead on who I'm becoming. Every day that I follow the habits of a healthy person, regardless of what my weight currently is, every day that I follow those habits is a good day. It's a day where I succeeded. It's a day where I cast a vote for the new identity, for the new person. And so it's a day where I can be happy and satisfied with what I've done. And so this journey has been joyful and not miserable. It's been, I don't want to say easy, that's not a fair word, but it's been easier than it could have been. It's not been arduous or miserable. It's been enjoyable because of that change in focus.
So it really sounds like, although you have this goal to be at a certain weight, it sounds like that's really not your goal. It's more of an outcome.
Right. It's who I'm becoming. While I'm continuing in my journey of health, there may be days where I slip below 170 or slip above it by a few pounds, but those aren't going to throw me off. Those are not bad days. They're learning to adjust and learning to be healthy continuously for the rest of my life. That's the goal. It's who I'm becoming. And as part of that, it's becoming a better husband, becoming a better father, becoming someone who has more energy and is more industrious, becoming someone that connects better with other people, as opposed to dissociating through food. All those things are part of this new identity, and that becoming that's the journey, that's the fun.
Any one of these items that you listed are more important than another, or they all have equal strength?
That's a fantastic question. They're not, and that's the reason I call them shifts and not steps.
Shifts.
Because if they were steps, you'd have to do them in order, right? You'd have to do one and then do two and then do three. These are shifts. It's like a combination lock. All the tumblers need to be in the right place, but it doesn't matter what order you get the tumblers in.
Okay.
As long as you've got them all as long as you've shifted them all correctly,
Yeah.
you can do them in any order. And they're just all things that need to be in place for us to shift that identity more easily.
So it sounds so similar to how I talk with people, and they come in, I just want to focus on the diet. And I'm like, that just doesn't work like that, because it's all connected. So it sounds like a very holistic approach, that you're really encompassing the whole person.
Yes, it is becoming a new person. It has to. And you're right, people have asked me the same, just focus on it, just tell me about the eating plan. And I say, listen, the eating plan is you shop less in the bakery section, you shop more in the produce section.
That's
we all
the
know
easy
that.
part.
We all know that. That's right. You don't need me to tell you that. It's the mental work that's harder.
Yeah. I was curious too about the word sacrifice, because I think what it elicited for me was sometimes it is more work than what I'd been willing to do, or at least more work than the mountain I had imagined cooking 2 eggs would be.
Sure.
But can you talk a little bit more on sacrifice, like what that means?
Sure. There's a story in a book of ancient scripture about a people that decided to change their ways. They wanted to go from being a murderous, idolatrous people to becoming a hardworking, peaceful, reverent people. And as part of this, this group got together and they performed a ceremony in which they dug a big hole in the earth and buried their swords as a token. It's written that it was a token to God, but I believe it was also a token to their fellow man, the people there in that group, in that tribe, that they were not going to take those swords up again. Not only would they stop the harmful actions of murder and just living a life of idleness, but that they promised God and their fellow man that they would become or covenanted that they would become an industrious people, a reverent people, a peaceful people. And I believe that those types of changes are part of this journey, that in addition to changing my eating habits, I needed to bury certain practices like dissociation. I needed to eat dinner with my family and not hoard ice cream in front of Netflix. I needed to make changes. I needed to become more industrious, get up earlier in the morning and do the dishes for my wife instead of sleeping in. Those sorts of things. I know those sound like small changes, but those are all part of becoming a new person.
But each one of those sound like the first time you try it feels hard.
Yes.
But now they sound like just who you are.
Yes. The first
so it's
time,
only hard at the beginning.
Yeah, the first time with any habit is new. It takes more energy. It's like a a rocket taking off, there's that escape velocity that
Yeah.
takes almost all of the fuel.
Yeah.
But once that rocket gets out there, its journey is much, much easier and
Yeah.
only requires little spurts of fuel here and there just to correct course.
I love the rocket analogy. That's awesome.
So sure, there is some energy at the beginning required to get that escape velocity, but once there's some momentum, it becomes very automatic.
That's awesome. Couple more questions.
Sure.
And then my closing. I usually close with a few questions. But what are you afraid of?
What am I afraid of? Wow, that's a huge question. I am, so in a larger sense, I'm afraid of anything that causes me to see myself as inferior, as any. I think most of us are afraid of those types of things. In this particular setting, I'm afraid of, or try to avoid anything that would cause me to want to go back to being the person that I was. I fear that, not in the sense of being overly concerned and stressed about it, but in the sense of definitely wanting to choose a path that avoids that goes around becoming who I was.
So being vigilant and aware, mindful.
Yes.
So we're getting down to the end of the show. I have about 3 minutes left. And I always ask my guests, what are the top 3 things it takes for them to be totally well? So you have about 3 minutes to elaborate.
Okay, well, no pressure.
And of course, they change all the time, but
Sure.
Just what comes to mind today.
Sure. For me, the top 3 things are first, a personal connection, and I don't want to push a belief system or anything like that. For me, it's a connection with God. Other people might say a connection with the universe or a connection with themselves, but basically an intuitive and thoughtful, deliberate connection with something higher and better than us that helps us to find peace, that helps us to be able to look objectively at things. The second part of that is taking care of my body and mind and heart, just eating properly and connecting with other people. And the third is just continuing to build and surround myself with a tribe of wonderful people that are supportive of the new person that I'm becoming. And again, starting with my family, connecting with and being present with and really connecting with my family.
Does it extend beyond your family as well?
Absolutely. There are a lot of friends and others who are part of this journey. You are someone that I very much enjoyed and appreciated meeting as part of this too, so absolutely extends beyond immediate family.
Oh, that's nice to hear. I'd love to be in your tribe and be part of your support.
Welcome aboard.
Well, I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I feel like our time's almost up now for today, but I'd love to have you back on the show and talk more with you. You've obviously learned so much, and I'm really proud of you. And I could also use your support for me and use you as a mentor, because I know a lot about this, and I really appreciate how much knowledge and how much you've had to study to make these changes, and how vulnerable you've made yourself to allow that to happen.
Thank you.
So thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Joyce. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome.